The winter sun was setting over Delhi, its orange light spilling gently over the gardens of the Prime Minister's residence. The air carried a soft chill, the kind that made people pull their shawls tighter. But inside the main hall, there was a quiet warmth. Narendra Modi sat at his desk, a pen in his hand, his eyes fixed on a small sheet of paper. He was not writing an official speech. There were no policy notes or government files in front of him. Instead, it was a personal letter, a handwritten note meant for one man, Sundar Pichai. It had been years since they had first met, and many moments had passed between them. Some were public, shared under the gaze of cameras. Others were private, spoken in quiet rooms where only trust and respect existed. But this letter was different. It carried a message that Narendra Modi had never spoken aloud. He paused for a moment, thinking about the right words. Leaders spoke in speeches. Businessmen spoke in strategies. But here, it was simply one human speaking to another. He wanted the words to carry the weight of a story, a truth, and a feeling that would stay with Sundar forever. The pen moved slowly. Modi's handwriting was neat, deliberate. Each stroke seemed to hold meaning. There was no rush, only care. As the words formed, the sound of the city outside faded, replaced by the sound of his own thoughts. Earlier that week, Sundar had done something few knew about. It was not announced by Google. It was not covered in the media. There were no press releases or social media posts. But Modi had found out. It had started with a quiet phone call from a village in Gujarat. An old-school teacher, one of Modi's mentors from his youth, had fallen ill. The surgery was expensive, and the family could not afford it. Without telling anyone, Sundar had arranged for the entire bill to be paid. When asked why, he had simply said, "Because someone once believed in you, and that belief shaped you. I want to honor that." Modi could not forget those words. They stayed with him all night. Here was a man at the top of the world's largest tech company, and yet he carried a heart that remembered small acts, quiet debts of kindness, and respect for people he had never met. As he wrote, Modi thought about the world they both lived in, a world full of ambition, competition, and noise. Yet, acts like this were a reminder that true greatness was not in titles or wealth, but in the moments where no one was watching. In the note, he did not thank Sundar in the way politicians usually thank others. Instead, he told him a story. It was about a boy who sold tea at a railway station, a boy who often felt invisible in the crowd. One winter evening, a stranger had given that boy a small packet of food and said, "I believe you will do something good one day." The stranger never asked for anything in return. He simply walked away. The world does not remember such moments, Modi wrote, but the heart never forgets. Your act for my old teacher is one such moment. Long after headlines fade, this will remain. He ended the note with a single line that was simple yet powerful. Never stop being the man who remembers the small things, because those small things are what make the world better. As he folded the paper and placed it in an envelope, Modi felt something unusual. It was not the satisfaction of completing a task, but the quiet hope that his words would reach Sundar's heart, the way Sundar's kindness had reached his dot outside. The winter sky had deepened into a shade of gold and purple. An aide entered the room, ready to collect the evening's documents. Modi handed over the sealed envelope, giving only one instruction: deliver this to him personally. The aide nodded and left. Modi sat back, gazing out of the window. Somewhere far away, Sundar was going about his day, unaware of the letter traveling toward him, unaware that soon he would hold in his hands a message that would not just thank him, but remind him of why he did what he did. And yet, in a world where so much was fleeting, this letter was meant to stay. 2 days later, the letter began its quiet journey. It was not sent in an official diplomatic pouch, nor was it carried by a high-ranking officer. Instead, Modi had chosen a trusted aide, a man who had worked with him for years and understood. The importance of small details. The aide carried the envelope in his jacket pocket, as if it was a treasure. He had been given no special security team, no flashy car. He would travel like any ordinary person, boarding a regular flight to California. On the way to the airport, the aide thought about the letter's destination. It was strange, he realized, how the most powerful messages were often the ones delivered without ceremony. There was no press waiting at the other end, no photographers to capture the moment. This was not about publicity. It was about respect. When he boarded the flight, he kept glancing at his jacket. The envelope was light in weight, but it seemed to carry a kind of gravity. It was not just paper, it was emotion sealed in white. Thousands of miles away, in Mountain View, Sundar Pichai was in the middle of a long day. Meetings, presentations, and decisions filled his schedule. His calendar was stacked with blocks of time, each marked for a different task. He moved from one conference room to another, answering questions, giving updates, and making choices that would affect millions of people. Yet, behind his calm smile and focused voice, Sundar often thought about something else: how easy it was for people in his position to lose touch with the human side of life. In the world of technology, everything moved fast. But humanity, kindness, and empathy moved slowly, quietly, almost unseen. That afternoon, just as he was preparing for a virtual call, his assistant entered the room with a puzzled expression. "There's someone here from India," she said softly. "He says he has something personal for you." Sundar raised his eyebrows. "Personal?" "Yes," she replied. "He insists it's from Prime Minister Modi himself." Curiosity replaced his usual calm. He asked her to send the man in. The aide entered, dressed simply, holding the envelope with both hands. There was no formality in his movements, only a quiet sense of purpose. "Sir," he said respectfully, "I was asked to give this to you directly." Sundar took the envelope, feeling its weight. There was no official seal, no heavy wax stamp, just his name, written neatly by hand. The aide did not stay for conversation. He simply bowed his head slightly and said, "He told me to deliver it in person, and now my work is done." With that, he left the room. Sundar placed the envelope on his desk, but did not open it immediately. Something about it made him pause. He finished his call, but the letter kept pulling his attention. Finally, when the room was quiet again, he picked it up and gently tore the edge. Inside, he found the folded paper. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, the ink slightly darker, in some places where the pen had lingered. As his eyes began to move across the words, his expression slowly changed. The sounds of the office faded. The busy world around him seemed to pause. The story about the boy selling tea, the kindness of a stranger, the way such moments shape a life, it all struck something deep inside him. But it was the last line that made him set the letter down and take a deep breath. Never stop being the man who remembers the small things, because those small things are what make the world better. Sundar leaned back in his chair, the words echoing in his mind. For years, he had worked to lead one of the largest companies in the world, but here was a reminder that the smallest acts carried the greatest meaning. He looked out the window. The California sun, bright against the glass. In that moment, he knew this was not just a thank you. It was a challenge, and he intended to answer it. Sundar sat still for a long time, the letter resting on his desk. His hands were open, as if he was holding something invisible, something too delicate to drop. The words had reached a place in his heart he did not often show to others. As he stared out the window, an old memory began to rise in his mind, one he had not thought about in years. He was a boy again, walking barefoot along the dusty streets of Chennai. His family did not have much money, but they had dignity. His father worked hard to provide for them, and his mother always made sure they never felt poor in spirit. One summer afternoon, Sundar had gone to the local library, a place he loved, because it held more stories than he could count. He was holding a list of books he wanted to read, but the librarian shook her head and said they were too expensive to lend without a deposit. Sundar's heart sank as he stood there, unsure of what to do. An elderly man nearby noticed him. The man asked what was wrong, and Sundar explained. The man smiled kindly, took a small leather wallet from his pocket, and paid the deposit for him. "Learn as much as you can," the man said. "Knowledge will pay you back more than money ever could." That day, Sundar walked home with a stack of books, so heavy he could barely carry them. He never saw that man again, but he never forgot his face or his words. Now, years later, Modi's letter brought that memory rushing back. The boy with the stack of books, the elderly stranger, the quiet act of kindness that had shaped his path, it all felt connected. He picked up the letter again, reading the line about the boy selling tea. He imagined Modi as that boy, standing on a railway platform, holding a steaming cup in his small hands, watching the trains pass. And he understood something very clearly. People who have known struggle often carry a deeper kindness. Sundar leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. He thought about his own journey, how easy it would have been to forget those early days once he entered the world of wealth and success. But he had tried not to forget. Still, the letter felt like a reminder that he needed to do more. Not just private acts of help, but actions that would inspire others to carry the same spirit. He decided to call Modi, not through official channels, not through public events, just one person speaking to another. But before he could pick up the phone, another thought crossed his mind. Modi had written this letter not for public recognition, but as a quiet exchange. If Sundar truly wanted to honor it, his response needed to be just as meaningful. He pushed his phone aside and took out a notebook. For a moment, he simply stared at the blank page, thinking about what he wanted to say. Then, slowly, his pen began to move. As he wrote, his mind returned to that boy in Chennai, to the elderly stranger in the library, to the unspoken bond between people who choose kindness without expecting reward. The sun was beginning to set, casting warm light across his desk. He finished the last line and closed the notebook. Whatever he planned to do next, it would not just be words. It would be something that carried the same weight as Modi's letter, something that would stay. That night, Sundar did not sleep early. The California city lights glowed faintly through his window, but his mind was far from the world of technology and deadlines. He kept thinking about Modi's letter, the schoolteacher in Gujarat, and the old man in the library who had helped him as a boy. By midnight, his decision was made. He would do something that reflected the message in that letter, something that showed the power of small acts but could still change lives in a big way. He began making calls not to executives or public relations teams, but to a few people he trusted deeply. They were old friends, former classmates, and quiet supporters of education. He told them his idea in simple words. "I want to help the kind of people who helped us, the ones who never make the news. I want to find them, thank them, and give them the tools to keep helping others." There was silence on the other end of the call. Then one friend said softly, "This is not a project, Sundar. This is a movement." Over the next week, Sundar worked quietly. He avoided big announcements and avoided telling the media. The plan was simple but powerful: find unsung heroes in small towns and villages across India. People who had changed lives without ever seeking recognition. Then, give them support to keep going. He called it the Quiet Hands Initiative. Every detail mattered. Each chosen person would receive help in a way that respected their dignity. No staged photos, no giant checks, just direct, personal assistance. But Sundar wanted to start it in a way that connected back to Modi's letter. He thought about the schoolteacher in Gujarat who had inspired this moment. He reached out to local contacts to learn more about him, his health, his life, his needs. What he discovered surprised him. The surgery had been a success, but the teacher's small village school was in poor condition. The roof leaked during rain, There were not enough books. The old chalkboard was cracked. Sundar knew what to do. Without informing Modi, he arranged for the school to be repaired. Fresh paint, new books, clean desks, and a small library. But there was one special request he made to the workers. Leave one corner of the school empty for a new addition. In that corner, Sundar planned to build a reading space with a wooden shelf filled with books, and on the wall above it, a small plaque with just a few words, "For the ones who believe in others before the world does." The work began quietly. No reporters, no public speeches. The villagers watched as trucks brought in supplies, workers fixed the roof, and painters covered the cracked walls with bright colors. Children peeked through the windows, whispering to each other in excitement. One evening, as the work was halfway done, Sundar received a photo on his phone. It was from the local carpenter. The small bookshelf was finished, smooth and polished, waiting to be placed in the corner. Sundar stared at the picture for a long time. In his heart, he knew this was more than just wood and paint. It was a circle closing from the old man in the library, to the teacher in Gujarat, to the letter on his desk, and now, to the children who would stand before those shelves one day. But there was still one thing left. He wanted Modi to see it not as a formal visit, but as a man walking into a school and seeing the quiet result of his own words. And for that, Sundar would need to find the right moment. The winter morning in Gujarat was calm, the air carrying the smell of wet soil after an early drizzle. The small village school stood brighter than it had in years, its fresh paint glowing softly under the pale sun. Children ran in the courtyard, their laughter mixing with the sound of distant temple bells. Inside one of the classrooms, the new bookshelf stood ready in its corner, stacked neatly with books in Gujarati, Hindi, and English. Above it, the plaque caught the light, "For the ones who believe in others before the world does." The villagers did not know a special guest was on his way. Even the school teacher, now recovered from his surgery, had no idea. Early that morning, Sundar had called Modi personally. It was the first time they had spoken since the letter was delivered. His voice was warm, respectful, but carried a hint of secrecy. "Sir," Sundar said, "if you have a free afternoon, there's somewhere I'd like you to visit. No cameras, no media, just you." Modi agreed, without asking too many questions. Sometimes, you could tell from a man's voice that the reason would reveal itself when the time was right. A few hours later, a simple white car rolled quietly into the village. There were no flags on its hood, no police convoys, only one security officer in plain clothes. When Modi stepped out, wearing his usual simple kurta and shawl, the villagers gasped in surprise but kept a respectful distance. The school teacher came forward, unsure why the Prime Minister was here. His eyes widened when he saw Sundar step out from the other side of the car. The two men greeted each other with warmth, like old friends who shared a silent understanding. Sundar placed a gentle hand on the teacher's shoulder. "Sir," Sundar said to Modi, "I want you to see something." They walked into the classroom together. The walls were painted with colorful alphabets, the desks neatly arranged. Sunlight streamed in from the windows, falling on the corner where the bookshelf stood. Modi's eyes moved to the plaque. He read the words slowly, and for a moment, he did not speak. The children in the room stood quietly, sensing that something important was happening. Sundar broke the silence. "When you wrote that letter, you reminded me of my own beginnings. This school, it's not just for learning. It's a promise that acts of kindness will not fade." The teacher, his voice trembling, said, "I don't know how to thank you both. This school was falling apart, and now it feels alive again." Modi turned to Sundar, his eyes softer than usual. "You could have told the world about this," he said quietly. "You could have made headlines." Sundar shook his head. "Some things are meant to be felt, not announced." For a long moment, they both stood there, two men from very different worlds. bound by a belief that small acts can shape the future. As they stepped outside, the children ran to the bookshelf, pulling out the new books, their voices rising in joy. And in that sound, pure, unfiltered both, men heard the reason why they were there. But what happened next was something neither of them had planned. As the children flipped through the books, laughing and reading aloud in broken English and Gujarati, Modi and Sundar stood in the courtyard, talking quietly. The winter sun had risen higher, warming the air, but what happened next made the moment warmer still. An older woman, wearing a faded green sari, slowly walked toward them. Her steps were careful, and her hands trembled slightly as she held something wrapped in cloth. The teacher saw her and whispered to Sundar, "That's Kamla Ben. She used to teach here decades ago." She reached them and gently unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small, worn notebook with pages yellowed by time. She looked at Modi first. "You may not remember me," she said softly, "but many years ago, when you were a boy selling tea at the station, I once bought a cup from you. You had no change, so you gave me tea for free. I told you then, one day, you will serve the whole nation. You laughed, but I kept this notebook to write about children I believed would do great things, and your name is here." Modi took the notebook in his hands, his eyes scanning the faded ink. There it was, his name, written in simple letters, next to a line that read, "He will rise if he remembers kindness." Sundar watched in silence. It felt as if the story had folded in on itself, the past reaching into the present. Kamla. Ben then turned to Sundar, "And you, Beta, I taught your cousin long ago. He once told me about you, the boy who loved books. I see that love has not left you." She placed her hand on both their heads. "The world forgets small acts, but we, the ones who receive them, never forget." Modi looked at Sundar, his voice low but steady. "This is the circle, my friend. What you did for my teacher, someone once did for you, and someone once did for me. We only carry it forward." Before they left, Modi walked back into the classroom. He picked up a pen from the teacher's desk, took out a fresh sheet of paper, and began to write. The children whispered to each other, trying to see what he was doing. He wrote only one line and left it on the bookshelf, between two books, where it would wait for a future reader. When you have the chance to be kind, take it. It will outlive you. He closed the book gently, and without another word, stepped outside. As the car pulled away from the village, Sundar sat beside him in silence. There was no need to speak. Both men knew the truth, that greatness is not measured by titles or wealth, but by the small, quiet choices that ripple through time. And somewhere, in a corner of a classroom in Gujarat, a single line written by hand waited to inspire another soul, just as a letter once had. Weeks passed after their quiet visit to the Gujarat school. Life for both men returned to its usual rhythm. Modi back to leading a nation, Sundar back to running one of the world's biggest companies. Yet, the memory of that day lingered, not as a sharp image, but as a warm feeling that returned in quiet moments. One evening, Sundar was in his office, the California sky turning a deep orange outside. He was going through documents when his assistant knocked and handed him a package. It was small, light, and carried no sender's name, only his own, written in familiar handwriting. Sundar opened it carefully. Inside, folded neatly, was the very letter Modi had written to him weeks earlier. But now, something was different. Underneath the original message, in the same ink and handwriting, a new line had been added. Letters are meant to be passed on, not kept. Give this to someone whose kindness deserves to be remembered. Sundar stared at the words for a long time. The meaning was clear. This letter was not meant to be an ending, but a beginning. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about all the people he had met through the Quiet Hands initiative. So many had given without expecting anything in return. Teachers, nurses, small shop owners, strangers on the road. One name came to mind, a young woman in a remote village in Tamil Nadu, who had been using her own small salary to buy uniforms for children, whose parents could not afford them. She never told anyone, and when Sundar's team found her, she insisted she did not need help, only more books for the children. A week later, Sundar boarded a flight to India. When he reached her village, he visited her school and spoke to her in the courtyard. "This is for you," he said, handing her the envelope. "It was once given to me, and now it is yours. One day you will pass it on to—" She looked puzzled, but when she unfolded the letter and began to read, her eyes widened. By the time she reached the end, her voice trembled. I don't know if I deserve this," she said. "You already do," Sundar replied gently. "And one day, you will know exactly who to give it to next." He left without ceremony, just as the aide had once left his office. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the young woman stood in the courtyard holding the letter, feeling its weight, not the paper, but the history it carried. And somewhere far away, in Delhi, Modi received a short message from Sundar: "The letter has begun its journey." In that moment, both men knew the truth. They would never see where it ended, but that was the beauty of it. Some acts of kindness are not meant to stay in one lifetime, they are meant to travel, quietly, across many. And so, the letter moved forward, waiting to find the next pair of hands, the next heart to remember, and the next soul to carry the promise. Never stop being the one who remembers the small things, because those small things are what make the world better.